the sea levels are rising, the governments are run by clowns, the memes are getting banned, and the rent is too dang high. All of these problems and more can be solved by one simple trick: living underwater.
It's quite possible, actually, and has been tested with things like Sea Lab and Helgoland. They've been designed by fancy people in Silicon Valley and fantasized about in works like 2000 Leagues Under the Sea, BioShock, and Futurama. Underwater habitats can be built far, far away from the jurisdiction of other countries and made into whatever the founders desired. They can research new theories that most places would shy away from. They can liberate someone from the evils of taxation and governmental support. And they can be the test beds for Mr. Musk's Mars mobilization or other outer space projects.
That's neat and all, but what are these places actually going to be like?
The underwater cities probably won't look like Rapture from BioShock. These permanent installations would sit a few meters below in shallow water or in the deep water next to volcanic vents. But the most productive and self-sustaining habitats would probably utilize the ocean floor and the sunlit shallow waters simultaneously. These could also be used as new neighborhoods to the threatened coastal cities.
As a matter of fact, Tokyo is planning on building an underwater habitat.
These installations have the advantage of being protected from surface elements like wind and storms, with the additional benefit of easy exploitation of power sources like hydrothermic vents and tides. And although there isn't a lot of data on it, many assume that the average cost of living for underwater residents is cheaper than country living due to all of the cheap energy. Even big problems like air and drinking water have good solutions. The water can be desalinated, which is normally a big expense, but is cheaper due to being at the same level as the water, and all of that said, easy energy. Air would have to be pumped down for now, but scientists think innovations in electrolysis could make the breakup of oxygen and hydrogen in water molecules much more efficient, to the point that they could even ditch the pumps. But how would these places make any money? Sure, those city places would just make rent, but how would the isolated, far-out domiciles generate wealth? Simply put, science. Our ocean floor is less understood than the surface of Mars, so there is a lot to discover. Scientists could do underwater research that only an underwater lab could provide. Universities and governments would give grant money to discover things like new species and whatever else lies in the deep. And corporations could offer the big bucks to probe for resources like oil and metals. As a matter of fact, these distant realms could even be owned by the corporations, like offshore platforms. And if not, well, I'm sure these places could grab a tax from the extraction of their local resources. Also, this habitat is the best candidate from being truly sovereign from other governments. It doesn't have to be near any land ever, and a lot of hydrothermal vents are way, way out in international waters. But if the habitats are close to metro areas, then they can also earn money from harvesting the power of the steam vents as a power plant. As a matter of fact, this is how I assumed this trend would really get started. Allow me to explain. So cities near underwater geologic activity would build permanent installations on the seafloor, not for living, just for power, but would need accommodations for the workers hanging out down there days at a time. As the sea levels rise, the cities would need to relocate displaced people. And someone would say, hey, we already have buildings underwater. What if we just build a bunch of additions and put the people in there? Then everybody cheers and the underwater trend kicks off. Technology would make these habitats cheaper and better, then a new frontier opens up for the resource-hungry populations of the 21st century. But how are we actually going to build these things? Underwater welding is very expensive and sounds ridiculous to have a bunch of carpenters in scuba gear. Well, everything would be prefabricated on land, then we would drop it into the drink and take it down to the construction site to be assembled together. Every single piece would need to be exquisitely designed and engineered so the assembly is as simple as possible for the 2-hour window diving permits, yet sturdy enough that the potential for a leak is laughably small. As for the details of what they will actually look like, well, concepts are kinda all over the place. Some are simple trailers, others are tubes and boxes like the city of Rapture, some are giant domes like what we would expect to see on Mars. I think we would end up with a bunch of different designs. Those domes make sense in shallow water so they can grab that sunlight. The boxes and tubes would work in international places because the geometry seems easy to tow and sink. And I think places that are built next to existing metros would have skyscraper-like buildings because they can utilize the seafloor and sea ceiling while still providing adequate density of real estate. Now, these underwater habitats don't actually exist for a reason. There are plenty of problems associated with them. The biggest one is investment. These places are going to be really expensive starting out. Normally, prefabricated buildings are cheap and get cheaper as production increases, but these buildings are going to need a lot of man-hours from those expensive engineers and designers, and these specialists would be the founders of a whole new field of architecture that nobody could even begin to estimate the true upfront cost. After things are in production, it's going to cost a lot for maintenance. Saltwater isn't very gentle to metal, especially when that metal is also dealing with living organisms and weather. The investors shouldn't expect a high rate of return when underwater habitats are soaking up money with their degrading hulls, constant need for resources, and fragile life support equipment. Aside from the governments, only the biggest development firms could be able to put up with these constant costs. And even the smallest problems, things that could be ignored in a normal apartment building, are all vital to the survival and welfare of the inhabitants. Think about it, a cracked window could lead to flooding. A power outage means everyone suffocates, and a clogged pipe can lead to a septic overflow. I'm sure these issues could be minimized to the point that they're ludicrous to even mention them, but definitely not at first. We humans are better at improving things as we go along, not producing instant perfection. If you have the money, these underwater habitats seem like the best way to create your own institution from the authority of any government. And once this investment gets going, this would be a great way for metro areas to expand. But the investment isn't going to be cheap, and living under the sea is dangerous.
And if you enjoyed what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And leave a comment. And ring the bell too, unless you find that annoying.